Thank you very much, Saul. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a journalist by profession and a writer, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about storytelling, and it's really a privilege to be among so many people who are interested in storytelling and are looking at it in through all sorts of different lenses. So I'm going to tell you a story about how I ended up here, which is also a story about how I went from being just a journalist to someone who is involved in the building of software. It's not something I ever thought would happen to myself. And it's a three-part story, as many traditional stories are. So I actually ended up here because I was completely obsessed with the idea of personal reinvention. A couple people have talked about that already. Saul mentioned it. You've sort of seen it on stage. And as a journalist, I love writing stories about people who reinvent themselves. And I kind of got obsessed with people who take that to the absolute extreme, so people who fake their own deaths. It's a sort of particularly American thing. People do it in other parts of the world, but it's sort of a perverse extension of the kind of American dream, something as a society we say that everyone can reinvent themselves. Faking your own death is taking that all the way to the end. So I wanted to write a story about it. I sat down with my editor at Wired magazine, a guy named Nicholas Thompson. He's a brilliant editor. And I said, I want to write about this. But it was sort of trapped in this traditional journalistic conundrum for narrative writers, which is it was a topic, not a story. A topic is abortion. A story is a story about the last abortion clinic in Mississippi and people trying to shut it down. A topic is people who fake their own death. A story is the journey of someone who did it and the emotional resonance that you might find in it by recounting that story. So I sort of laid out all these different examples that I had come up with of people who fake their own deaths, and none of them were really appealing to him. And so finally I just said, you know what, why don't I do it? Why don't I fake my own death? And he said, you know, that is the dumbest fucking idea I've ever heard. And he was right. But then we kept talking about it, and he said, you know what if you didn't fake your death, but what if you tried to adopt a new identity? What if you shed your identity and adopted a new identity and you went on the run? And we said, well, that's kind of interesting. And it's more interesting if you're on the run if people are actually looking for you. So what if we had a contest where anyone could find you and win $5,000? And we thought, well, it's more interesting to be on the run and have people looking for you if there's an incentive to stay on the run. So what if $3,000 of the $5,000 came from you? So we set about convincing Wired magazine to do this, and eventually we did. So 4 years ago, in August of 2009, there's an issue of Wired magazine that had a bunch of sort of silly-looking mugshot-like pictures of of me, and it said, find this man, win $5,000 by saying a code word and taking his picture. And we set up some rules around it. You weren't supposed to break the law. You weren't supposed to contact my family. And I, meanwhile, spent a couple of months prior to that developing a new identity. So my new identity was named James Gatz, after Jay Gatsby's original name in The Great Gatsby, the great reinventor of literature, American literature. I developed identity cards, credit cards. I tried to build a whole world that I could fall into. So then I set out across the country, sold my car, hitchhiked, took buses, trains, hid out while trying to figure out if anyone was looking for me. Now, there were two things that could really go wrong in this from our perspective. One of them was that people would break those rules that we set up and they would do something really crazy. So, you know, harass my family or break the law in a very severe way that we might be liable for even. And the second one, which was arguably worse from our perspective, especially my perspective, was that no one would give a shit. No one would try to find me. And so we kind of went into it saying, all right, well, either of these things could happen. Hopefully they don't. And it turned out they didn't. And there was a whole audience of people who were interested in this topic and were interested in finding me for all sorts of motivations. And they went crazy with it, but not in the scary, crazy way, for the most part. So they set up Facebook groups around looking for me with thousands and thousands of members. They communicated on Twitter. Twitter was still fairly young then. People were posting hundreds, thousands of posts a day, tweets a day, trying to figure out where I was, what the clues were. They made maps of every address I'd ever lived at, maps of where I might go, maps of people that I had associations with. They made intricate diagrams of purchases that I had made, because Nick could put out any information from my old life. He could distribute it free on the web for anyone to use. And they made flyers. I mean, this was a little embarrassing, because there are like real missing people in the world. And they put them all over different cities. So they really got into it in a very interesting way. And so, meanwhile, I had the problem of all these people now looking for me for real, and I was trying to make it a month, keep my $3,000, have an interesting story. So I had to sort of deal with my appearance. I became to fear that someone would actually just run into me on the street and say the code word, and they would have heard it on NPR or seen it on CNN. So I had to sort of adjust my appearance. I got more and more extreme over time. That's me in Las Vegas. This is me in New Orleans, trying to fit in. I have the fedora. And then I really, really got into it. Actually, the whole reason I tell this story is just so I can show that picture. And actually, this picture this was actually the #1 Google image result for me for like 2 years after this. And I had this experience of going to meetings, and people had Googled me before the meeting that I didn't know, and for the first 10 minutes, they were sort of like... So, I won't spoil how it happened, but I will spoil the ending, which is that they found me. They found me before the time was up. I lost my $3,000. I got a great story about it. I wrote it up for Wired magazine. They put it on the cover, and it was the biggest sensation. I'll never write a story that will come close to matching the popularity of it. I mean, I was on Norwegian TV talking about it. It'll be on my tombstone, like he tried to disappear, didn't quite make it. But there was something actually slightly disappointing in the production of it, which was that I had shot all this video, and there was all this sort of interaction with the community of people, which couldn't be captured in that print magazine. Now, there was an online version where they just sort of put it up online, but I was always a little sad that they didn't use any of the video that I had shot, and it wasn't really a digital artifact when, in fact, a lot of the story had taken place in the digital world. But we had learned, Nick and myself, sort of 3 things that at the time I don't think we even knew that they were the lessons from it. But the first one was, and we've kind of applied these now in the 2 things that we've done since. The first one was that sometimes you have to create the world that you want to live in. So sometimes the story isn't there, and you have to go create the story yourself. The second one was that sometimes you have to sort of appeal to the better nature of your audience, or assume the better nature of your audience, which is really what any of us do when we're telling a story. I mean, I'm hoping that you're not going to boo me or walk out or any of the other things that you might do, and I'm sort of trusting that you're going to do that you're along for the ride with me, and in the same way that these people weren't going to harass my parents. And the third one was, as related to my hair, that you kind of have to go all in. So once you set up a world and you say, okay, this is the world I'm going to set up, you really have to jump into it and say, I'm going to go all the way, because you've asked the audience to do that same thing. Now, a couple months after this, Nick and I were sitting around, and we were kind of lamenting about the online version. And we were also lamenting the fact that there's a lot of pessimism in journalism, especially around long-form writing, especially at this time, which was late 2009. And so we were saying, well, why isn't there an outlet that could do this type of story on the web? And the reason, so that's Nick on the left, that's me in the middle. The third guy is Jefferson. He's a programmer. I'll introduce him in a second. So the reason why people weren't doing this stuff on the web, this was the sort of like, this is the stupidest fucking idea ever version of that, which is this amazing graph. It's my favorite graph that I've ever seen, because it's completely absent any data at all. It just says attention span on the left. It's literally not even numbers. It just says attention span, and then it starts at 1860. You probably can't see it very well, but it says Dickens. And by the time you get to 1925 Hemingway, the attention span is already obliterated for some reason that's not articulated at all. And then by the time you get to 2005 or YouTube, it's just like you're basically headed for just like people grunting back and forth. It's just gone. We can't even communicate. But this was the conventional wisdom of doing journalism on the web, writing on the web, blogging, Twitter came along, everything's going to be shorter, everything's going to be quicker, everything's going to be instant breaking news. So we said, well, what if we go against that? What if we say, you know what, let's try to tell these types of stories, these longer stories, these more in-depth stories, in an entirely digital world, and actually treat them like digital artifacts, design them not as print things that get translated into the digital world, but actually as digital first creations. So that's what we did. We started assigning stories. We created a publication called The Atavist, where we produce those stories, and then we try to sell them wherever we can reach readers. So we sell them through the Kindle as short books. They're sort of between magazine and book length. We sell them on the iPhone through an app. We sell them on the web. We sell them on the Nook. If there's a place that you're reading books or stories, hopefully you can find it there. We also decided to really try to integrate and create a new type of storytelling with video, audio, maps, timelines, ways of understanding these stories and telling them in a way that's not possible in print. So we started doing that. We started producing stories that have more of a film component than a written component. This is actually the story about the last abortion clinic in Mississippi. And to date, we've produced 30 stories. And something amazing happened in the course of doing that, which is that we did find an audience. Not a huge audience, not a scale up your business and go public for $1 billion audience, but we've sold hundreds of thousands of copies of these stories, and we've paid writers hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees and royalties to do them. So that was another example of the same principles sort of at work. So then the question sort of became, is this possible a third time? Can we apply these same principles? So along the way, Jefferson, who was on the right in the picture there, he had created a piece of software to enable us to do that publishing. So we could not find any software that would let us build a story, incorporate video, audio, all of these things, and then push out all these versions. So the Kindle version, it couldn't take all the video, so we needed a text version of that. We wanted a piece of software where we could do it all once, and then we could kind of create both the high-end, the HD version, immersive storytelling, and the simple version. So he had created this software, which is called Creativist. It's a play on the Atavist name. And along the way, we had a lot of people say to us, again, the version of this is the stupidest fucking idea I've ever heard, was this has all been tried before. This was tried in the era of CD-ROMs. I don't know if anyone else played with CD-ROMs. Actually, there were some brilliant CD-ROMs. I spent a lot of time with them, but people said, well, they tried that, and it died out, and nobody wants interactive storytelling. No one wants multimedia storytelling. It's really still about getting page views. The faster, the better. The more churn that you can put through your website, the better, et cetera, et cetera. But then a funny thing happened that had nothing to do with us, but maybe we played a part in it. But on the web, there became a growing group of, first of all, starting out with journalists who became interested in doing storytelling at length, long-form journalism on the web. And that included the New York Times, famously last year, but they were sort of following on the heels with this Snowfall production that they made, following on the heels of places like Pitchfork, of places like ESPN Online, places like BuzzFeed are getting into long form. So there became a sort of view on the web that actually it's not all about getting people to your website and having them stay there for 2 seconds and then leave. That it's not just a sort of noble thing to do to try to tell long stories, because that's what I love and I like reading them and writing them. It's actually a business proposition, because in a world in which everything is going in one direction, there's a great advantage in trying to attract people by giving them something that appeals to their intelligence, that appeals to their actual attention span that still exists, even if they don't exercise it every single day. So this was happening out in the world, and it created an opportunity for us to open up that software and let people use it to tell their own stories. So that's what we do now. We both publish our own pieces, and we enable other people to do all types of storytelling. And that includes NPR in Boston telling the story of the Whitey Bulger trial with decades and decades of archives by a brilliant journalist who has dug into this story for years and combines maps, combines photos and videos to sort of tell the entire arc of this story and how it affects Boston. It means a young journalist who got a grant from the Pulitzer Center to go to China, to go to the Congo on his own and understand the impact that China was having there and come back and create that story. And it means our stories, and it's funny that Coronado was mentioned earlier, including the fun ones, like the story of a drug gang that started at Coronado High School in the 1970s with a bunch of students and their Spanish teacher that became the largest drug cartel in the United States before it was taken down in the 80s. So we are telling these types of stories, but actually, everywhere you look now, people are trying to find ways to tell long stories, and that includes Coca-Cola, it includes Intel, it includes Microsoft, and again, the reason is that if you appeal to the better side of your audience instead of the worst side of your audience, it doesn't mean that you will reach the mass audience, but it does mean that the people who care about that will actually be very loyal to what you do. So not only are we telling these stories, we also have an opportunity now, in fact, next week, to release the version of my vanishing story that I always wanted to see. So we've been working on that for about 2 months, and we're able to incorporate all of the aspects of it, including what turned out to be very embarrassing videos. I'd never actually looked at the videos, but the videos that I took of myself on the run, paranoid and it's crazy sounding, are in there, and it's really fun. The only unfortunate thing about it is no matter how we tell the story, it always ends the same, which is with me getting caught. Thanks.